What's up, guys? David DeSell here, your host of the Business with the Boyz podcast. And as always, joined with our co-host, Landon Troyer. And we recently came off of an episode with a super cool dude, Brent Blecha. And Landon, we didn't have the episode, or excuse me, we didn't have a chance to record the intro after the episode like we typically like to do. But I feel like the conversation is still fresh in my mind. Like, it was pretty cool hearing his story. Yeah, very vivid. And then he sent us a story afterwards, which I wish he just literally read that word for word on the podcast.
We could have spent 2 hours on that alone, I think.
And he, just as a sort of quick overview, he's currently running operations for two different startups, and he came from a big data background. But one of the most interesting things that we spent quite a bit of time on is the fact that he spent 5 years sailing and living on a sailboat. And there's no exaggeration when I say he started that by literally reading a book called Sailing for Dummies.
No bullshit on that. Yeah.
But it was cool to see, so the two startups that he's a part of now is Flex Perks and Retail Aware. And we actually had an opportunity to meet him at our meetup that we had recently in Nebraska before we even recorded. And I was like conflicted. I was like, I want to talk to you in depth, but I also want to save all this for the podcast. So it was just
same.
It was just interesting.
I almost felt bad trying to like not ignore you, but like I kind of need to ignore you because like I know this shit with you being at sea for 5 to 6 years on your own, and I'm gonna want to go down that rabbit hole. So, and I honestly wish, like, he just downplays it so much. Like after reading that story, it literally was. We kind of got into it with him after the show, and we've been continuously communicating here about like what was the scariest moment at sea, and he's like, "Oh, check this out." Sends it over, and it's like you felt like you were reading.
You get goosebumps.
A line from a movie. Yeah, like it was like, holy shit, this is vivid, this is real. And the dude didn't know if he was going to survive. Like quite literally, the storm was nasty, crazy. He's seems like kind of a tin can of a boat on his way trying to make it to Turks and Caicos in the middle of the ocean, and shit got weird. I wish he would have unpacked that a little more, and we might have to have him back on just because the dude is so interesting. I mean, I remember when he walked into the party, I was like, well, there's only one guy that could be.
He's just a cool looking dude too.
Off the beach. Yeah. Like the dude's shredded, like handsome fellow, and you're like, oh, well, that's gotta be the guy that lived at sea for 5 years that we got introduced to. Sure as shit. And he's like chill, great human. Literally, like now his whole thing is, he wants to put good out there, do good things with these companies. And I think, hopefully all of us could get behind supporting a cause in a business, companies like that.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just cool to see. So for everyone listening, so you have some context as a little teaser heading into the episode, like this is a guy who is part of a SaaS company, software as a service company that was at zero. And by the time he left, they were at $70 million in revenue. And he was in charge of basically heading up the sales team and other departments and whatnot. So like, he oversaw 70 million in revenue being generated, which is just mind-boggling. And then he had a distinct moment in his life that I'll save for the actual episode where he was like, what the hell am I doing? I just need
not worth it.
I just need to take a break. And then he just left for 5 years on the sailboat. And then he came back. And I one of the things I asked him when we were in person in Nebraska, I was like, what was that like? Like, because he obviously went ashore in various places and like interacted with locals while he was sailing, but still, it's different when you get back home, so to speak. I was like, if that were me, I feel like I'd be weird. I'd be hesitant. He's like, dude, I was weird as fuck. Like, right? Like reintegrating into society, and
like
then
Aquaman rolling back out into the real world.
Oh man. But he's just he's a good dude.
And he's a cool dude. Like he's just a cool dude. Like, yeah. I'm rooting for him and success in these startups. I mean, the guy's going to be super successful no matter what he does. And if he's not, then fuck it. He's proved he can go live on $10 a month and in the ocean, spear fishing and just be a badass. So life's pretty good for him either way.
There you go. Well, I think Landon and I are done teasing you on some of the highlights from the episode. Let's go ahead, dive in, and go meet Brent. Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believe me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces. That me, you really playing with your life. I'm about to come and run it all back. So, Brent, we had an opportunity to chat in Nebraska just a few days ago at the time of this recording, at least. And obviously great to meet you in person. And we also had an intro call, and we're going to need to have, I think, part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of this podcast, because there's so many different paths that we can go down. But just to help set the stage, you've been a part of a SaaS company, Sales Genius, and ran the training for that company. Took a sabbatical in Zimbabwe, volunteered there. You've been to all 50 states, 30 to 40 countries, have your pilot's license. You sailed for 5 or 6 years, and currently you're a co-founder of a startup and a bunch of other things going on. So I guess my first question to get us going is, how old are you? Because this is like 7 lifetimes all in one, and you don't look like you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s. So like,
I think he may be Benjamin Buttons. Are you aging in reverse, Brent?
I wish that was the case. No, I'm 45, actually 45, just as of January.
45. Well, you've crammed a lot into, I mean, I would argue, 25 years, because I don't picture you doing a bunch of this stuff in your first 25 years. So how'd you get started on this journey? Was it in your childhood? Was it after school? Like, when did things like really start ramping up in your life?
That's an interesting question. So I'm from small town Nebraska, and there's just not all the opportunities that you'd expect from a bigger city. Thankfully, I had just amazing parents who made it a point that I got out and started to see and understand cultures. I went on my first trip out of the States when I was 16 or 17 years old. We did a trip to Spain and France, and honestly, starting then, I was hooked. I grew up as kind of a nerdy kid, or had this nerdy phase through there. And that was like the first time I really had my eyes open. It's like my universe was no longer my small town. And so that travel bug bit me hard, and it's been with me ever since.
There you go.
Love it.
What was your first gig out of school? And maybe it was, but I'd be shocked if you helped build out a SaaS product, right out of school. Like, what was that first step?
No. I was at Info Group at the time. We built out that SaaS program, and that came a few years later. We haven't got into this, and this is kind of outrageous and up there. I've had a very interesting and blessed life, but after university, I had big plans. I was going to move to New York City, and unfortunately, 9/11 had just happened, like the fall before I graduated. And so that dream kind of got shut down. So I moved to Omaha, Nebraska, and I started working somewhat in the fashion modeling industry world. And I came across this guy that was an investor in a restaurant. Well, they were running an ad, and I ended up being in that. And so I met this guy, and he was an investor in a restaurant. So he kind of got me this job bartending, and I worked there and did that while trying to pursue this kind of dream career that I had. And thankfully, he had a lot of connections, and it gave me the ability to move to Europe for a little while. So I lived in Nice, France, and worked in Milan for a couple seasons. After I came back from that, my dad won't tell you this, but he was kind of the catalyst for me coming back and getting the quote unquote real job. And like, I couldn't do that forever. And so I came back and I worked for the same guy that was investing in the restaurant. And this led down just this incredibly strange, bizarre, weird path. For those of your listeners who know the name Terry Watanabe, he started Oriental Trading around that same time.
Us local Nebraskans will know.
Yeah, he walked away with about $500 million and all the money that he made from that. And he set up a charitable trust called TKW Enterprises. Now, I didn't work directly for him, and I did not work directly for the organization, but I worked for his EVP at the time, and so just some weird interactions with him. And so I would be on private jets going to Chicago to pick up a tuxedo that they needed for an event that night, put that into a limousine, and then I would get back on the plane and fly home. And ended up going to Las Vegas, doing a market analysis and living out in Las Vegas for a little while. All of this before I started at Info Group. And there's a lot that we can go through there, but I don't know if you want all those details.
Shit got weird with that guy too, didn't it?
Yeah, he's the largest whale in Vegas history. And I saw some pretty crazy things. I had to go speak to the FBI a handful of times. And it was just things that somebody under the age of 25 never should have faced. And it was like really crazy, cool, eye-opening, like exposure to that
like dark underworld type shit, right?
Absolutely dark. And interesting.
And this was all before 25 years old?
That was all before 25 years old. Yeah.
That's wild. What about, so talk to us about your first step into helping build out the SaaS product. Like, what was the SaaS product? Like, kind of talk to me like I'm 5 years old. Like, what was the overview of this product, and what hand did you have in helping scale it?
Yeah. So Info Group, Info USA, past Info USA, became Info Group. Now it's become Data Axle. I was there for 10 years, saw 5 different CEOs, and I think I only had Info Group under it might have been Info USA to Info Group while I was there. But they sell data, the largest data compiler in the country, sold both business and consumer data, and they sold it to everybody and anybody. Once they compiled that database, they spent like $50 million a year compiling this database, and they resold it in every single way, shape, and form. Whether it's like sending you a postcard with a leads list, or sending labels that you could peel and stick and put on postcards and send out. And they even had it in like Best Buy on CD. You could go in and buy a CD of businesses or consumers, whatever. And so when I started was 2005. They had just launched the SaaS-based product. So it was their first go at having a web-based product that we had to convince people or help business owners understand the data atrophy and how the limited time space of the shelf life of data. And so it's like telling these business owners, like, no, you don't need a list of 5,000. You need what you can manage today. And so pull off the 25 calls you're going to make, or pull off the 50 new movers to your area and start canvassing those areas. If, say, you sell home insurance and somebody had a fire, do a half-mile radius around them and send everybody a postcard letting them know about fire insurance or something like that. And so I started with a small sales team of 15, and later took on like 100 or it was probably 75 salespeople. And then we also had we were hunter farmer model there. So we had like this SMB inside sales group, which we spent just a ton of money marketing for, ran did Super Bowl commercials 2 different years, 2007 and 2008. And we just grew like crazy. And those were fun, interesting years, and I'm happy to dig into any of that as well. That was an interesting time to be at Info Group.
Yeah, they were a major player in Omaha. I mean, I don't know what they're like now, but I mean, I remember, there was always some turnover, always some changes going on.
Yeah.
But they were the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room as far as doing big shit in Omaha back in the day, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's changed a bit. Like Ben Gupta was the CEO at that time. He's since stepped away, and he's running his own organization now, Biz USA, which is a direct competitor. But he understands business data licensing, and he's kind of slowly clawing back at some of those contracts. I think Data Axle is trying to pivot and rebrand themselves a little bit, but still. I later did the agency type services for the largest clients, and was there to protect the revenue. Info Group had grown through acquisition, so there was like 18 different entities that we had to reduce down to 5. And all of those that fed those enterprise clients is the group I ended up running and taking over later in my career.
When you said that you guys grew like crazy, define that, like revenue X to revenue Y, like what was that journey in terms of numbers?
Yeah, shortly before I started, it was revenue $0. And so coming on board, I don't even know if we were at $1 million yet. We had just started hiring. They had started hiring pretty heavily by the 5 years. So we had taken that. We had bought an office in San Mateo, California. We brought over a president of Salesforce.com, and he was taking over running this as its own entity. We are no longer really reporting up to the Info Group umbrella. Sales Genie was branded as itself. We'd run these Super Bowl commercials. We'd take out full page ads in Time Man of the Year, full page ads in USA Today. We were spending just an absolute bonkers amount of money on marketing, to the tune of about $10 million per year on marketing to drive calls to this inside Salesforce. The idea was that when we bought the San Mateo office, that we're going to build out mid-markets and enterprise salespeople. So every single person that got hired out in that world, we brought into Omaha. They spent a week with me, and I showed them everything about Sales Genie. And of course, I know that I'm not the expert, and so I kind of created this training curriculum that's still used there today, where you introduce this group to all of the subject matter experts for their fields. So the person running inside sales at that time, the person running client engagement at that time, the person that's running marketing, the person that's running tech. I would give them a database tour at the actual office there in Papillion, Nebraska.
So you started at 0, and then over that period, what'd you hit in terms of revenue?
I left, we were probably $69 million, $70 million. Yeah.
69, $420 million.
Yeah, 60 to $70 million is what I remember us being at. It was a huge number.
When you grow that fast, I'm sure that there are a lot of great things that happened over that time, but I'm sure in that hyper growth, there was a lot of things that broke down, whether it be personnel or turnover. Like when you're growing that fast, you're probably hiring a lot of people. People are probably slipping through the cracks that probably shouldn't have been there. Like, what were some of the learning lessons on that journey from 0 to 70 million?
Yeah. Around that same time, there was just there was quite a few changes that occurred. One of the biggest things I remember from this is that enabling people to take action on things that they see that are not right and making those changes immediately. Where it doesn't need to be a major, huge process change where you have to roll something out organization wide and you got to collect all this data on it to make a decision 6 months from now. Is like, use that data that's coming in at that time based upon the leads that are coming in or based upon where you want to be at the market, based upon the amount of churn that's occurring. Like, have a team that starts doing only works on those people that are looking to cancel. Let's transfer those calls to them because these people have a higher propensity in the group that's just servicing those accounts on a daily basis. And that hunter farmer method really worked well. Have people that you can route leads to intelligently to make sure that the person that has the highest propensity to close those, so you get the best bang for the buck from those marketing dollars. Make sure those people are getting those leads and closing them, as well as the people that have the higher propensity to just walk people through and train people over and over and over again. And they're able to do that on a daily basis to help you retain that revenue. Like the subscription model, the SaaS models where everybody's moved to since then. And even in 2005, I don't think it was that big of a deal, but understanding that predictable, sustainable source of income, forecasting was a breeze in that division at that time.
And as far as
you guys were ahead of the curve on the SaaS stuff, then, I mean, because like I said, that wasn't the normal. I mean, now that's all it is, right?
Yeah. From what I understand from the group, they actually kind of reverted back to a less intelligent model. So there was so much churn happening. Like once you hit critical mass, right, there's people that fall off and you've got to fill that funnel. If you ever fall short, what they started doing was selling these one-time lists again. So one-time email lists, one-time postcards. And so you don't you got to chase that revenue again next month though, because that revenue is not coming back to you. And so it was really a paradigm shift. I think training was one of the biggest things that we had. There was an amazing guy that was my predecessor. His name was Chad Greer, and he was a really good trainer. He just understood sales very well, and he understood the data. And I think that's the biggest thing that he showed me is our nugget, like our golden ticket at Info Group was the quality of the data, and that's where we really competed. Package it any way you want to and segment it any way you want to. That at the end of the day, that was the important bit.
And you got up to, call it 70 million. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks would just ride that train and keep being a part of that growth. But you didn't. You had a transition. What kind of prompted that transition?
Well, I'll tell you where I transitioned before. So I kind of got tapped as a high performer inside of the organization, and I got just interesting projects thrown at me. Like once you're identified as somebody that can just take something and they don't know that much about it, and they understand that you're somebody that can figure it out and do something with that, and then like add value and put it back into the market. And so as Sales Genie had transitioned, 2008 happened. We got pulled back under the umbrella. They kind of cut the head off that the San Mateo office, and a lot of the executives, particularly us Omaha guys and a few others that were high performing sales managers in particular, got pulled back under that umbrella. And with that, we were tasked with, as they reduced down these divisions, was to run this enterprise group and protect the revenue. And along with that was understanding what every single other division did, how to sell that, what their kind of competitive advantage was in the market, and understand all the touch points. So we did business like Coca-Cola and with Journey's shoe stores. We did business with American Express, just these very large companies, and they were doing business with Info Group 18 different ways and had 18 different contacts. So let's reduce that down to one person who's that one neck to grab. And I had account directors that were much smarter than I, had these great relationships. And I was kind of that executive assistant to make sure they had what they needed to be successful and protect and grow that revenue. That was a tumultuous time for sure, but a pretty valuable one. And then I think I kind of know where you're going with that next question is how the heck did I end up on a boat, right?
Yep.
Basically, yeah. What
yeah.
What kind of prompted you to be like, what am I doing?
Get me the hell out of this corporate world. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had one thing that really impacted me initially that made me kind of rethink things is I mentioned growing up in Superior, Nebraska. I followed these two brothers that actually grew up on the same block as me to this smaller university where I played football and ran track. They both played football with me. Anyway, this guy was pretty special to him. His name got the name of Drew Eckert, who passed away at the age of 35. He'd been fighting brain cancer a couple times. And I talked to this guy like probably 3 days before I get a call from his brother. I was just leaving the gym, and Todd calls me and he says, "Brent, we lost Drew." And he was, I don't know, just an amazing guy. Like he was the only other guy that didn't drink in high school and college. We went and like worked out over the weekend, and just good, best guy on the planet, right? He was friends with everybody, and just fun to be around. And so once that happened, like the volume at work just got turned down. The dial went to zero, right? I remember sitting in it. I did 5 days later, I flew to a meeting in St. Louis, was meeting with the higher brass for AT&T. And I didn't give any shits about being in that meeting. I don't know if I can say that on here, but I didn't give any shits about being in that meeting.
Yeah.
Like I did not care one bit about growing AT&T's revenue 5%, right? And so that's when I came back to the drawing board and was kind of, I just need to take some time off. So that was May. I booked a trip to go to Africa that September, and that's where that's when I spent the time in Zimbabwe. I went to Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, but the majority of the time I spent in Zimbabwe. And that's where I came back from that trip, and it's like, okay, so one, life's short, and it's not guaranteed, it's not promised, right? And then two, you see these people in Africa that have absolutely nothing, and you understand that money does not equate to happiness. And so I really had to do some soul searching and decide like what I wanted to do at that point in my life, because what I was doing wasn't working for me at the time.
How long were you in Africa for?
Spent just a couple months there. Again, the majority of that in Zimbabwe, and that was spent time in a village and out of school, and just volunteering some time there and understanding. I also did some fun things, so it wasn't all just work. Like I went on safari and did some sightseeing.
So you got really ingrained like with the local culture. I mean, when you say you got involved with school and you know, native tribes and all that, like you saw the real Africa. And you weren't just doing the Hilton version.
No. I can give you guys some pictures if that's something you can pop up on the podcast for people to see.
That'd be cool.
I actually was interviewed about all the travels, and that was a big part of the catalyst of what we went with there.
I remember I did a service trip before, and similar sort of vibe, like in the village, and we were helping clean up the village because they had no system for trash. So they just threw the trash like in the canal by them. Their main source of food and revenue was fishing, and their boat capsized. So they got another boat without a motor, and you can read between the lines maybe how they got it. Maybe they took someone else's, but they did not have a motor. So like part of the trip was like raising money to buy them a new motor. So they were fired up, right? So was there for a week. And I remember at the time I was a financial advisor, you know, suited and booted every day, shirt and tie. And I literally couldn't.
Don't hate.
I couldn't. I couldn't. I know you're still suited and booted.
Both you were
going to
say both you busted my ass before being dressed up for this call.
So, but I remember for a full week, like I couldn't bring myself to go to work. I'm like, none of this actually matters when you see how these other folks live and how happy the kids are running around, no shoes, kicking the deflated soccer ball. And you're like, what am I doing? What am I stressed about? And eventually I realized that my bills still needed to be paid and I needed to get back to work, and I got back, got my act together. But how was that adjustment period when you got back from Africa? Like, did you go back to work at that time and then end up leaving? Did you go right into, getting on the boat, which we'll talk about here in a moment? Like, what was that step when you came back from Africa?
No, I came back and I stepped right back into work. Some friends of mine, they were getting married in somewhere in the Riviera Maya. And I had bought a sailing book, and as I actually bought Sailing for Dummies. I'm from Nebraska. I'm landlocked. I didn't grow up sailing. I thankfully, amongst the countries I visited at that time, I had stayed on board of a catamaran, sailing through French Polynesia, but I wasn't doing any of the work. I was strictly there as a passenger. But I remember telling my buddy Nick at the time, he's like, I told him, I think I'm going to try to sail around the world. He's like, what? How do you even? I'm like, well, got this book.
The funny thing is, he obviously knows you well enough to know that like you were serious.
Yeah,
he's like, no, this guy's freaking crazy enough. When he says something like that, he's going to do it. Like if I told David I was going to sail around the world, he'd be like, good luck, dipshit. He knows that would never actually happen.
Well, that's like if I told Landon I was going to redo my whole house by myself, he knows that's not the case based on our visit that we just had.
I'd say, well, when do I need to show up? Because I'll be doing the work.
Oh man.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like, by that time, when I turned 30, I'd written this list down, and the first thing on my top of my list was pilot's license. It's kind of a bucket list, but I was 30 years old. It's just like things I wanted to accomplish. It's just time to reflect almost. And so I turned 30 in January. By May, I took my Discovery flight, and by my birthday the next year, I had my pilot's license. it's just kind of one of those things that once that switch is on, it's on, and I focus on it, right? And so that's what I did. This wedding was in November, and that was the first book I bought. And I didn't take a sailing class. Like I didn't apply any of that learning until August, but I read every single thing I could consume. I was going to the library to check out books. There's a Libby app on my Kindle that I was downloading books for. Anything I could find, I would have them bring in sailing books for me. And I started reading sailing blogs and stuff like that. How did people do this? How did people go about doing this? What was their budget? What boat did they buy? Why did they buy that boat? Like all kinds of things. So that was my thought process. So I had my pilot's license. So I knew weather and I knew nav. And I'd read this amazing story about this guy from Iowa that had flown around the world. He would fly his plane, but he had like a Cessna 182. And he would fly to like Ireland, and he'd leave his boat and he'd fly back and he'd work, and then he'd go back to, or I'm sorry, his plane. He'd fly back to his plane and then get back on. He'd fly it to France. He'd fly back commercial, and then he'd go back to his plane and then fly to Turkey, and so on and so forth. And he'd flown this thing around the world. And so I actually reached out to him because this was an AOPA magazine, which is the pilot's magazine. And I'd reached out to him, was getting ideas, but you put pen to paper and it's super expensive. The fuel cost to do that kind of thing is astronomically expensive. But you know what's free? Wind. I just didn't know how to sail. So that led to me buying Sailing for Dummies. It's like, I bet I can figure this out.
I was going to ask what about sailing is what attracted you at first, but that answers the question certainly.
The transportation cost.
Transportation. You move real slow, but
and you're not exaggerating.
You thought about it, right?
And you're not exaggerating either. Like it was legit the book Sailing for Dummies. Like
yeah, I still got it at home. It's at my parents' house.
That's wild.
Exact one I thumb through and like dog-eared. It's still at home.
So now, obviously, when you fly, you're with an instructor. Did you just raw dog it with sailing, or did you have an instructor along the way?
Give me a second on that one. Yeah.
Raw dog the boat life, man.
You do start flying with an instructor. Eventually you got to go off on your own. Right. And I kind of followed the same principle. I did all this academic type learning, and then it was like applying this learning. But I flew down, I made my buddy in Clearwater come on my first ASA 101 class. And it was like a 1-day thing, and it was just stupid easy. It's like they're teaching retired couples to sail, or kids that like are going to sail like hobby cats. And so like all the parts of the boat I already knew, and that's essentially what they went through. And then the I forget what it's called now, the parts of sail, which is basically the direction you sail and what they're all called. And so I had all that under my belt, and was like, this class is kind of stupid. But I flew back in 2 weeks, took ASA 102 or whatever the next one was, where you actually take the boat, you move it out, and then you bring it back. And that was also incredibly easy. I made the same buddy from Clearwater do that with me, and we had a good time, right? But it was not challenging. You were in Tampa Bay, like you didn't even see, you were in shot of the shoreline the entire time. So of course I lied about my qualifications, and I told this, I met this guy on findacrew.net. It's that's all you do. You find a crew. This guy was finishing a circumnavigation. He was sailing somewhere through the Med. He was going to end up in Gibraltar. I had to be there at this date. He wanted to take off for the island of Madeira, which is a Portuguese island off in the middle of the Atlantic. At that date. And it's like, you can't book your weather window, but like, so book travel around here. So I'm like, okay, cool. I can help you do that. So me and two other much older British guys show up to help to like steer this boat out into the Atlantic. And we took off, and as soon as we left the Med, it was terrible weather, like big building seas. There was like a Hurricane Gonzalez or something like that was off the east coast of the US. And so where the trade winds blow like 95% of the time the same direction, we had winds at our face and big building seas. And so we had to turn south and hug the coast of Africa. And as soon as we tacked back to Madeira, it was like big building seas into the wind. It wasn't a comfortable sail. I got seasick. I was throwing up out there at night, just staring at a compass heading. It was brutal, to the point where he's like, guys, we need to make a decision. Are we going to try to pound through this for another 6 days? Or do we just turn around and go back to Gibraltar and get there in 2, kind of a thing? And so we turned around and went back to Gibraltar. And I tell you what, that experience really laid the groundwork for me. Like it's not an easy life. And you're not only are you going to be debilitated sometime, but I'm planning to do this all on my own. So it was like the perfect experience to show me what I was really getting into.
That experience made you say, hell yeah, I want to do this.
Yeah, what the heck, dude?
There's something twisted about that.
Well, it was a really smooth sail back.
Oh, man.
If the wind's at your back, it's not so bad as what you learned, right?
Yeah, wind at your back, smooth seas, following seas and smooth sailing.
So how long from that till you bought your own sailboat, and what was your first trip?
So I was back the next month. I booked a flight down. So I'd started researching all the boats, and I had to narrow down to like 10 different ones from all these books I'd read, like those kind of inexpensive boats that are like high pedigree, that don't have a ton of equipment, that can sail around the world. And so I had to narrow down to 10 different boats that I wanted to.
What is when you say an inexpensive boat, though? I mean, I feel like I know what
that's
just
relative,
my basic
right?
surf boat cost, and to me that was expensive, right? It's like I can't imagine a boat that can sail around the world is going to be less than a couple $100,000, right?
No, way less than a couple $100,000. Yeah. So okay. You can buy a well outfitted, high pedigree boat with virtually no systems from like 1970. That's fiberglass. That essentially is a floating ping pong ball, which is what you want. So even if you turn over, the thing pops back up to the surface. And so those were the 10 I went and looked at. And so I am not like independently wealthy. There was a bit of an exit from Info Group because we took it from being public back to private, and I had some shares over my tenure there. But I hadn't left my job yet. I was still working, and I flew down there. I'd started selling everything I owned. Like I had a Lexus at the time. I'd sold that, and I had sold a lot of my stuff because I was like all in on this. And so I flew down to Florida, looked at a bunch of boats. I found a couple that I liked. I decided on one, and I went and looked at a few of those. And I tell you, it was a couple I bought it from was the reason that I bought it. This couple was just amazing. There were a couple out of Pennsylvania who had met very briefly. He was moving to Australia. He convinced her to go with him. They moved over there, and he started building his own Faro cement boat that they later sailed around the world.
A cement boat?
Faro cement boat. Yeah.
That seems pretty counterintuitive with cement and water.
Oh yeah,
that's could be.
If that thing sprung a leak, you are sinking to the bottom. They were very inexpensive to make, and that's what they did. They sailed that thing around the world.
Wow.
Not the boat I ended up getting on. I was
just saying, did you get you didn't buy a concrete boat?
That's a very poor investment, guys. If anybody in the audience is wondering, those are not selling for anything. You get one very cheap.
So you bought their boat. What was your first solo trip?
So I drove this Jeep I'd bought on Craigslist down with everything I owned. I remember saying goodbye to my parents. I'd taken a U-Haul down to Superior and said bye to my parents. And I was just like, they were sad. They didn't know what was going to happen to me. Neither did I really. But I was like, hey, this might not even work out. I might have to come back, and I'll just go back to work, or I'll do an RV life thing or something. And my mom just broke down in tears at that, right? And so I took off. I drove 24 hours, made it down to Florida, and stayed with this couple that I bought the boat from, and sailed it up the river. This is my first time really doing it. My first time with a tiller instead of a wheel. But I had that boat hauled out, worked on it for about a month. And I was still working for Info Group at the time. I didn't tell anybody that I just decided to move down to Florida and live on a sailboat.
Jeez. So when was the inflection point of leaving the corporate world and sailing away?
if I'm honest, that change happened that previous year when my buddy died. And so all that really drove this whole decision. Now that was,
you just needed the time to put everything in place to be able to do it after the fact.
Yeah. I was on autopilot, right? But I was very good at what I did. I can talk to people, and I love listening, and I love trying to solve people's problems. And so that's relatively second nature. But there were some changes. The wrong people got layered, like, because of these CEO changes. I'd been there in the organization. I'd grown. But then these new CEOs would bring in new presidents, and these presidents would layer somebody over me. So I was like stagnant.
I was going to say, like, only thing I ever remember hearing about like Info Group and that whole crew was like all this turnover and like all the layoffs. And then I talked to you, and it's like you were like the one constant at this point that somehow never got chopped. So you're obviously doing something right. Yeah,
there was honestly very few people at that director level that stayed. Everybody above that kind of got replaced, right? I was lucky that I had the most amazing mentor. His name was Tom McSweeney. He actually had an exit himself from Proxy did, when he came over, he did such a great job of just coaching and mentoring and protecting. I can't say enough good things about that guy, but I learned virtually everything from working underneath him at that time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What was the coolest experience on the sailboat, either place or just crazy shit that happened while you were out there? Like, fill me in on that.
I can do a couple things. I can give a couple stories there. I'll do one that's virtually all positive, and then one that was a little bit of
sketchy.
Gonna test your metal. So first off, I sailed down from from Port Charlotte to Fort Myers to Key West, and I was like offshore 24 hours with no land in sight, over 100 miles, kind of a thing, by myself. Which all three of those things are things most sailors will never do in their entire life that have been around boats forever, right? And here I am, this kid from Nebraska doing his first solo sail, and that's what I decided to do. It just doesn't make sense. But I learned that I needed some time to figure this all out.
Well, you read a lot of books, so you must have been prepared.
Yeah, right? Yeah. That's all it takes. Just read about it.
So applicable from page to water.
Yeah. But I get down to Key West, and I stay there for 4 months to kind of build the boat back up. Figure out my solar, because I fried some batteries with not knowing how my refrigerator worked or like my power draws. And so I had to like learn all these things, and I had fuel pumps go out on this diesel engine, and I had to fix my tiller. There was just things that happened. It was a boat built in 1970, and it's not perfect, and I definitely wasn't either. And so it was just like, let's figure these things out together. And I'd fixed this up in a yard by myself, not on the water. So putting in the water, you figure out a few more things. So, but after that, I was like, all right, it's time. I'm ready. Let's go over to the Bahamas. And I went there in July. Like, I went right as hurricane season gets into the heavy point. And I had like, these things, but you don't really understand. Like, nobody really comes to the Bahamas until like November. And so I was the only boat that was there at the time. And thank God.
Smooth sailing. No traffic.
So I get to Exuma, Bahamas. So I went to like Nassau, and I stayed for a while, and I check in at Bimini, go to Bird Key, because I had some issues with the boat once the waves really started stacking, because it goes from the Atlantic Ocean to the Bahamas, and that difference in height really creates some pretty powerful wave power, and that shook some things out of my engine, that clogged some things, which caused some hoses to break and caused water to just be pumping into my boat. And so I had to figure some stuff out there, and like talk about some of the things.
So when you say figuring it out, like, are you figuring this shit out in the water? Like you say you're taking on water, like, I'm assuming you're trying to
I'm on the water, waves stacking, the boat's just getting bounced around. There's not enough wind to really sail. And this hose broke on the engine. So now the what typically cools the engine and kicks outside the boat is now pumping into it. And so I'm trying to steer the boat, and I'm running this bilge pump at the same time, and just like, I'm going to drown out here. This is my first real test, right? it's great sailing across the Gulf Stream to get from like essentially the Miami area over to Bimini, Bahamas. But man, talk about things that'll test you, like your own resilience and your own fortitude. That was a good test. But I steer in and I'm pumping still, and I pull up and I pull into a marina. It's my first time on a marina because typically I'm just living on the anchor. And I need this hose to replace the one that just clogged and broke on the engine. And they don't sell anything in this little place. There's no real population density. It's essentially a dock to get fuel that I had to tie up to.
I'm picturing you like if you've ever seen Pirates of the Caribbean when Jack Sparrow rolls up and he's like standing in the crow's nest as the ship like is literally sinking and he just walks right off of that onto the dock. Like, no, there she is. Fix her up. Let's go. Made it.
Thankfully, this couple I bought the boat from knew something about boats, and they had this bilge pump. It's called a whale gusher, and it every single pump pumped 1 gallon of water off. So even though this engine's kicking on water, this thing's pumping out. And the second I shut the engine off, it quits pumping water on. So as soon as I tie up and I'm no longer using it, I'm pretty good. But I go to the laundry room. I go to do laundry there, and there is a 1-inch rubber tube that runs to drain the washer down to the kind of the place where the elbow bends, and it looks exactly like the piece I needed. So I just cut 10 inches off that. I go install it with a boat with 2 stainless steel hose clamps, and I replace it in the thing because there was enough of this tube, and I'm good to go. I sail over to Nassau the next morning, take off.
Now, what is it about? It's either, I don't know, something in you or a screw or two loose. Like, I feel like what you've shared so far so early on would cause most people to say, what am I doing? And go back home. But you proceeded to sail around for another 5 years. Like, what was it about that? Was it exhilarating and you kind of got a high off of that? Was it, I just need to remove myself from the day-to-day hustle and seclude myself and just kind of be one with, like, what was it that kept you from saying, screw this and going back home? Because I think most everyone, maybe except for you, would have done that.
Yeah, I think for me, running the whale gusher for about 10 minutes and scaring the living shit out of me would have been enough to be like, yeah, I think once I get to Nassau, I'm going to book a trip back home on an airplane.
Yeah, there's enough stories of people that made it that far and actually flew home and never stepped foot on a boat again. There's plenty of those stories. But great question, David. I don't know what it is. Maybe it is that I'm a little bit crazy, but I kind of managed my own expectations and knew that this would not be easy. And I wasn't about to face failure. And I'd gone through tougher things than this in my life. I mentioned when we talked, like by the time I got on the boat, I'd been to 30 or 40 countries already and visited all 50 states. And you just learn a lot about yourself. And virtually all of it was solo travel. Had I waited for people to go with me, I probably wouldn't have done any of that stuff. So it's just like, let me book that first trip and do some of these things and just make the most. All of it's about just improving your situation. Like all of this stuff's going to go bad, but I'm going to tell you the other story where these are just kind of lead ups where I thought this was like the worst thing possible. I was going to die out there until the next time. And that time has to be more than that last time, right? For it to be memorable. So it's just like improving your situation, working through it. And you did this to live and you didn't do this to die. And so you're not calling AAA, you're not calling the tow company. You're figuring this all out on your own.
Did you just mob like a bunch of cash and have it with you? Like how did you fund this?
Well, I asked him too when we were together in Nebraska, like, what did you eat? And he's like, sometimes I would go on shore, but mostly I'd just grab my spear and look for food, grab a fish and grill it up. Like talk to us about like, what was a normal day like?
So that's actually a really great segue. So after leaving Nassau, you hit Exuma and it's 365 islands and keys and virtually no people. So I would just go sail into these amazing waters and I would anchor off and I remember one time I got there late. It was dark already, and I dropped anchor, and I woke up that next morning, and to pull anchor, I was going to sail to the next, I don't know, sail for next 12 hours, and then do the same thing. But I was just surrounded by starfish, hundreds of Bahamian sea stars in the water surrounding me, and I was just like, I think I'll just stay here a day, and that's really the essence of it. Like it's that freedom that it provided you. And like you're saying, if I wanted to eat something, I grabbed that spear. I'd stocked up on a few things in Sam's Club. I'd driven up to Miami and came back and had stocked up on like beans and rice and I don't know. There's canned meats. Some of this stuff you just think of as staples. I had there, but for the majority of it, I was trying to kill something. I was waking up and trying to spear a lobster or spear a fish, and I'd pull it up and put it on the grill.
Had you ever done that before, or did you read about that?
I had never spearfished before I got on the boat, and the thing was, they won't give you an advantage in the Bahamas. Like you can't have a spear gun that like shoots a distance. You got to have this thing called the Bahamian a sling, which was essentially a large rubber band attached to a pole arm that you would have to be relatively close to a fish to get a good shot off. And so I actually had to get good. So I cleaned fish before. I grew up in small town Nebraska, a lot of hunting, or I didn't hunt, but camping and stuff like that. And I was a lifeguard. I've traveled a lot. I've done some free diving. I've done, I don't know, 75 to 80 dives for PADI. So I'm very comfortable in the water. I can hold my breath for a long time, and I can swim like a maniac. So my longest GoPro video that I took under the water was over 3 minutes, and I started that camera down below the water. So I could like just hold my breath and just wait for fish to relax, and I would hold my spear cocked and just be upside down in the water, steering inside of a coral, waiting for a fish to kind of make its move out, and I would shoot it.
For over 3 minutes.
Right. Yeah. Somebody didn't believe me the other day, and I was like, I can hold my breath for 2.5 minutes right now. And I did it right there. They timed me.
That's unbelievable.
I've since gotten away from it. And I should get back to it. That maybe this serves as a reminder, but I used to do this breathing exercise on Mondays. It was like over Zoom, and it was like through the power of breath, like your body would tingle, you would kind of reset, you'd almost like hallucinate. It was like this 40-minute long guided like breathing exercise. And there's a bunch of benefits that I can't regurgitate right now. I forget exactly, but it like felt really cool. And one of the things that I noticed is after just like a couple sessions, like I go from being able to hold my breath for like 30 seconds to literally like 2.5 minutes. Literally just after a couple sessions of practicing. So Landon, to that point, like it's wild how your body can adapt when you train it to do certain things.
Sure.
So I had to go. Do you have like a water filtration thing on this boat? Like, or did you just buy big old things of water from Sam's Club, or like, what did you drink?
Yeah. So I had a pseudo filtration system. But what I would do is like there's an RV filter that you can get to hook up that just kind of cleans water. And most of the places near these dinghy docks where you pull your car up to has reverse osmosis water. So I'd hook that filter up to that. I would fill these 5-gallon jerry cans. I would take those back to the boat, and I would dump those into like drinkable water, as well as I had a 60-gallon tank. And if I was away from shore for a long time, I had a rain catch. So I would let the first 10 minutes of rain get everything wet, wash the bird crap and dirt off, and then I would just use the rain catch to take it directly into my tank until that was full. And that's when I actually got the best showers. I would when it was raining, I would just go out there. That was the opportunity I took to like wash my hair and whatnot.
Yeah. Get the old soap out and lather up and go.
Yeah.
What was the inflection point of, all right, I've been doing this for a long time, 5 years. 5-6 years to, okay, I'm going to go back to shore and get back to work? Like what was the deciding
assimilate
moment?
again.
Yeah.
Well, so at this point, I'm in the Bahamas. I later leave that, and I have a pretty scary instance at sea. Like I was doing my largest crossing. I was going to cross from Bahamas down to Puerto Rico, and I was going to sail out basically towards Bermuda till the winds changed, and I was going to go straight south. And I had a pretty scary moment out there, but that blew me into Turks and Caicos, and then I went to Turks and Caicos, Dominican Republic, to Puerto Rico, stayed there through hurricane season. And then kind of made a dash down the island chain. And I went to a few small island carnivals. And along that way, they told me, if you enjoy these carnival celebrations, these small islands, you need to go to Trinidad. They have the biggest in the Caribbean. And so I took that advice, and I made it to Trinidad before a carnival that February. I arrived a week before. Pulled the boat up and tied off to a mooring there, and started going to these carnival fetes. And I was planning to stay in Trinidad for about 2 weeks. I was going to have my boat hauled out and do some work on it, repaint the bottom. There's this ablative paint so stuff doesn't grow on it, and just do some general maintenance on it. But I went down to take pictures over Carnival. I'm like I like to think of myself as like an amateur photographer, and with all these travels, I had to get good at it, right? Like, because nothing looked like my pictures when I first started doing this, and so I had to get better to prove that I was actually at these places, and encourage other people to travel, motivate them to go see some of these places. And even though you're born in Nebraska, doesn't mean you can't do some cool stuff. So I'd gone down and was taking pictures for the Carnival Parade on Carnival Tuesday, which is leading up to Ash Wednesday, which is like Fat Tuesday for Mardi Gras, if they know what that is. But I took a picture of this one girl, and we met, we talked after that, and I ended up staying in Trinidad for 2 years. And even though we didn't stay together that entire time, it was pretty much the catalyst of me kind of falling into the culture and like creating friendships. And Trinidad was by far like the biggest island like I really spent time on there. They don't really cater to tourists. It's an oil-based country. There's shopping malls, and there's large grocery stores, and there's relatively reliable travel. So some pretty interesting things that were there, but it was the people. The people were some of the happiest people I'd ever met on the planet. And there's such a melting pot. Granted, I was the only guy that really looked like me outside of Carnival there, but it was just incredible. I still have some of my best friends on the planet live in that country.
That's awesome.
And then you went from there back to the States?
So once I kind of spent that 2 years there, again, I wasn't independently wealthy. I bought a pretty inexpensive sailboat. I was no longer living on anchor where I could just kill food. I was like going into town and I was spending money doing stuff. I had like a gym membership there, and was like shopping at a grocery store most of the time, because all the coral around that place is kind of dead, and it would take a lot for me to go out and find somewhere where I could find a coral head and try to spear something. So I went back. I came back to the States with the intention, like I came over Christmas to see my family, and I was going to start the job hunt. And that brought us into COVID season almost. So I rode that wave, and I put the boat on the hard when I left, because I didn't know how long I was going to be gone for sure. But that kind of forced my hand as I came back to the States.
Damn, came back at just the wrong time.
Yeah.
You should have stayed out there.
Stayed in Trinidad.
Yeah, it would have been.
Well, they had some of the worst lockdowns on the planet of any country, and it would be such a weird thing, because the countries were quarantining you, so you couldn't come to shore and couldn't check in. So you could have been stuck on your boat outside of a country and not be able to get on shore, or have to have paid for a doctor to come to you and prove that you didn't have COVID. Those were crazy times amongst those first months of where things were relatively unknown.
What was the reassimilation?
So it's a blessing I was back. What's that?
What was the reassimilation like? I would imagine, and granted you had decent amount of human interaction the last, year or two in Trinidad, but like, I feel like it would be tough. There's so much solitude and alone time out at sea and anchoring off of an island that no one lives on and just kind of hanging out and meditating, praying, etc. Like, how was there any issues kind of like, were you weird? I guess I'll just ask it straight up. Like, I feel like I'd be weird if that was me.
I was really weird. So it took me a long time to get away from this, right? Like you're working, I worked probably 65 hours a week. I flew 50 times a year. You're waiting for that next notification, the next email, the next text, you're just constantly on, right? And so it took me a long time to learn to relax, to just be, to wake up in the morning and have a tea and read my book until it's like so hot that I need to jump in the water and go kill dinner. And then I'd get back and I'd maybe do some food prep, maybe not, maybe work on something on the boat, some project that bounced up or check my lines. But it took me a long time to relax. And you got to think this is 2014. I took off and I come back and it's 2019, the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. A lot changed in the States. And I've been living in these third world countries where they're not bombarded by marketing the same way we are. Like they watch YouTube videos and they don't get ads every 10 seconds, right? That pop up. And so for one, I was weird myself. I had changed a lot. Like I'm not the same person coming back to Omaha. And so even with my friend groups, they had a hard time understanding me. And it's like, they'd ask questions like, how was the trip? And I'd probably talk for 2-3 minutes. And then they would tell me everything that's going on in their lives. And it's the exact same stories I heard before I left, with different characters potentially, but it's the same things they're focused on. And I just felt like these people are just focused on the wrong things. And so I found myself even becoming more and more recluse. If it wasn't for my family, like I have a brother here in town. And then of course I have wonderful parents that support me. If it wasn't for them, I don't even know. I still feel weird, right? Like you think differently, you react differently. Your whole sphere of influence has changed. You have a total paradigm shift in it all. But the good news is, like, I can talk to anybody, and I love to listen. We talked about this, David, last weekend. Is the curiosity I have from meeting all these different people that had lives is. I still have that in me. I love to ask questions. I love to listen. I love to hear people's stories because they become the most interesting person on the planet. And I guess I throw myself into work and I throw myself into some of the volunteer things, some of the things I want to say yes to. And that helps me pass the time, but I'm definitely different than when I left. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's cool. I think from just meeting you, like I said, this last weekend, you can just tell a lot of that with, like, you're just strategic with the way you're consuming the information and talking, and I think that's special, to be honest with you. Everybody is in today's society is instant gratification and me stuff. And when you find somebody that looks you in the eye and is like, no bullshit, just interested in your story, that's pretty cool. So I would definitely agree that that's a good thing for sure. So
I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you.
You mentioned that there was the situation with like friends and it was tough to like almost tough to get reacquainted, if you will, for lack of a better way to put it. Would you say that, like, are you still friends with them now or just friendly with them, but you don't really have much in common? And if it is the fact that you've sort of grown apart, what was that like psychologically? Because, these are guys that you've known for years that now you may have nothing to really talk about. Like, what was that process like?
Yeah. I'm still kind of working through that all this time later, right?
It's got to be crazy different because you went from being like this badass business guy, right? Like you said, to soul searching, just alone with your thoughts and then you come back and it's like Groundhog's Day with everybody else, but you're completely different.
Yeah, that's what it's like. They've gone on with their lives, and their kids are older. They found a partner. They've done these things, and I missed a lot of those important dates and things where I would have been invited and would have gone, and I could have continued in their lives, and they could have continued in my life. But those big gaps, just the thing. Most people they messaged me at first, like I had WhatsApp, Facebook, and most people did a pretty good job of keeping up at first, but at some point, like out of sight, out of mind, almost like if you and I was off the grid for months at a time where they couldn't get a hold of me and I couldn't get a hold of them. And so I don't fault them. Like, I still cherish those relationships, and they're still great people, and I would do anything for them. But it's just changed a bit. And I think that's the case with any relationship. You think about like how tight your relationships were in college, and then you move somewhere, or people move away, and you just slowly lose touch, and you still care about that person. But it's just the second I bounce those people up or are able to meet up with them, it's like no time has passed. But it's like you talk about the things you did together more than they ask you questions about kind of the things we're going through today. They'll probably learn if they end up watching this. They'll probably learn a few things.
Well, this is actually a perfect segue. So we've talked about what you've done. What are you doing now? Right, you're involved, I believe, in a couple things. Like, what is your professional life look like today?
Other than just growing a beautiful head of hair. By the way, you guys got some of the best head of lettuce. Those of you that can't see this, I'd recommend just tuning into the YouTube channel just simply because he's got the smile and the head of lettuce is solid. You walked in the other night and I was like, damn, this dude looked like he just rolled off the beach like Fabio just rolled in here. I was like, that's got to be Brent. Sure.
As a reminder, dude, his first thing out of school, he was in Milan, going down the modeling path. So it's like, if all else fails, just hop back on that train, Brent.
Yeah, throw the Calvin Klein undies back on and just go start taking pics, bro.
Yeah. So, thank you.
We made them blush, Landon.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I'm happily married, Brent. So just don't worry.
Same.
I was getting nervous now.
Yeah.
So when I coming back was hard. I felt like I had this amazing story of why I left. Right, like I had a buddy die. I kind of reevaluated my life, and now I've got to come back and work. I've got to earn that almighty dollar. And I kind of left feeling like I was part of the problem, driving people to buy things that I don't believe they needed at the time. And so here I come back, and I really wanted to do something. In finding a job after this is hard, right? Like you've got a huge gap in your work history. All of a sudden you have long hair and you don't fit into the work environment. And I'm going to say this about Omaha, and I kind of mean it in the best way possible, but a little bit stuck in their ways, right? Like, so I don't look like the typical person that's going to be hired for some kind of executive level position. And I got passed over for a few times for promotions inside of this $750 million company where I felt like I'd really earned that place to be the VP or president level of these things. But I was kind of stuck at a director level from 18. And so I knew what I was capable of, but now I've got a gap in my work history. And so I'm getting asked to step into things that I don't really want to. But I interviewed for positions outside of the U.S. and outside of Nebraska, and there was a lot more likelihood I was going to do something there. But with COVID, it kind of made it tough. But I met this guy, Daniel Karen. I was introduced by a friend of mine who was actually asking for advice on what islands he should go visit, and found out I was back, because I really wasn't sharing all that much at the time. And he's like, well, there's two companies I need to go meet with. So I met with this guy, Keith Fix, who runs Retailaware. And I met with this other guy, Daniel Karen, who had started this company called Gap Wallet, which we later had to change the name. Gap actually paid us to change the name, which later became FlexPerks. And so I met with both of them. Keith had this great idea, but not a product yet, and couldn't afford me to come on. And Daniel Karen had a great product that he thought could take off, and it was doing some cool things. And I had some ideas to share with him. And so we kind of we co-founded that company together. It's called FlexPerks now, and it's healthcare adjacent. I feel really good about it. And it's something I really wanted to do. It's like solve some of the socioeconomic disparities that exist in healthcare. How do you make healthcare more affordable? How do you educate people in healthcare? How do you align healthcare goals? And that's what our whole mission is, right? And so it feels very good, and that's what we want to do. It's not paying me yet, but that's what I started. And so if you guys can do anything for me, and so we're always looking for investors and trying to get people to come on board to help with that. Especially those that have ideas on how to and have that same kind of mission vision. And so we're off there. We're taking off. Some really good things happening. COVID, I think, hurt everybody and kind of slowed some things down, but reinvigorated there. And I continually work on that. A few months later, Keith Fix and I kind of stayed in touch with Retail Aware, and he closed a pretty massive round of funding to the tune of about $2 million. And he needed somebody to come in and run operations, people, process, product, kind of things all needed attention. And he was running kind of the bare bones. And so I started with them. We had a conversation in October. I was started in November this was 2022, I believe. Yeah. So two and a half years ago. And so I run operations for two different companies. I briefly ran operations for a virtual healthcare company, which put me in touch with this other group who was doing this amazing thing, like putting kiosks, trying to solve some of those healthcare desert issues, and also deploying them for in the instance of emergencies. The guy reacted to FEMA and was down there providing care. And it's like, why is this FEMA tent so far from the people that actually need it? It's like, let's make something fully autonomous and deployable that can bring care to the people. And so I sit on that and advise for that. We're doing some fundraising for that to get that going. And then I sit on a couple boards. I sit on Homeland Security Foundation of America. I sit on Ralston Youth Sports. I sit on Ralston Arts and Creative District here in, it's Omaha, right? But it's a small town inside of Omaha. And sit on the board for American Red Cross. And just, I do a lot. I stay busy, and I try to say yes to all the things I want to. Most of it is things that I think really make a difference.
What would you say? So as I kind of reflect back to our first intro call that we had to when we met in Nebraska a few days ago, to this conversation, I feel like you left, you went sailing, you came back, and it seems like you came back more purpose driven is kind of what I'm like extracting from everything that's been shared. And I don't know if you've articulated this before in a concise way, so forgive me for putting you on the spot for something that perhaps you know off the bat, or perhaps you don't, but like, what would you say your purpose is now?
Yeah. If I had to put that into words, I would say that I want to change the landscape of healthcare. Like having a dad as a physician who worked at his own clinic that later had to sell to a hospital, and seeing what's happened with healthcare in general, and seeing what's happening with insurance. It's like really trying to provide whole health, educate people, and do that kind of piece where it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of things, is just help people go to where they need it, where they live, work, and worship, bring healthcare to people. They shouldn't have to drive 250 miles to go to a clinic. Like, how do we leverage technology and some of the things we know and understand to take healthcare to people and really create some change there? I think that's my work vision, but personally, it's just try to be a good human, be a good person, and don't be a dick, I guess, as I say.
What's your purpose? Don't be a dick.
Yeah.
Amen.
And that solves a lot of things.
I think so.
I guess with the healthcare, so you kind of alluded to it, but like, so I have and Landon has one too, a concierge doctor as opposed to, just a regular physician at a big hospital. And, he had said, I forget the exact example or the exact numbers, but you'll get the point, where he's like, hey, when you go and pick up this prescription, tell them that you do not have insurance. Because if you have insurance, it's going to cost you like $150. Mm-hmm. But if you say you don't have insurance and you pay cash, it's going to be like $19.
Yeah.
Is what you're doing in the healthcare space potentially addressing that type of issue? Because that seems asinine.
Yeah, no, 100%. We were talking about their concierge medicine. So we align ourselves with direct primary care, and so those are people that essentially have a subscription to go see their doctor. So they're on a text-based relationship. They can pick up the phone and call. They can email their doctor. The doctor doesn't see more than like 10 patients a day, kind of a thing, and so they can spend time with, and their goals are aligned. Like the typical hospital system is, if you're sicker, you will see them more often and they will earn more money. The direct primary care system, or the concierge system, is the exact opposite of that. They want you to get better so you don't come in because they earn more money. And so that's how we're really trying to fix healthcare. Like it's like my dad provided back in Superior, Nebraska when we first started, is people would call the house, people would show up at our door. Like I remember a kid came with a dad and a kid came with, the kid had a broken arm. Dad walked him over to the clinic and casted his arm, right? That's the kind of service and the kind of health outcomes I think we want for everybody, is that personal. Instead of these doctors having burnout and leaving clinics because they're seeing so many patients and people coming in for everything, and they're not being able to spend any time with the patient, and then they're filling out the paperwork for insurance. It's just not the way it should be, I don't think.
Agreed.
Yeah, I forget the exact numbers. You'd probably know it better, but like a regular primary care at the hospital has like 3, 4, 5,000 patients, whereas a concierge doctor has like 2, 3, 400 patients. So like I remember there was an issue that I had where I called him I texted him on a Sunday night and was like, hey, I know it's Sunday, like no need to give me a buzz tonight, but do you have time tomorrow morning? And within 2 minutes, he called me on a Sunday night. And I was like, you're never going to get this, from a primary care or the hospital ever. No. Their reaction would be like, new phone, who's this? Like they don't really know you either,
Yeah. No, I right now myself, I'm on insurance through my company, and I don't have a primary care physician. I use Teladoc as, granted I'm healthy, right? So I don't need it. But I use Teladoc, but I think everybody should go to the direct primary care / concierge model, for at least for primary care services. It would keep healthcare costs down so much more.
For sure. I feel like we can go in so many different directions and angles, and I feel like, and I joked about this earlier, but we could have a part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and just kind of focus and hone in on a particular section of your life. But in an effort to try to tie a bow on this conversation. So one of the things that we ask all of our guests is a book that's had an impact on them and why that is. And it's funny hearing your story and knowing which book you chose. It
wasn't Sailing for Dummies.
No, it wasn't. But it was. I was like, okay, that makes a ton of sense because you've sort of recreated yourself. So the book that you had noted was The Alchemist, and I'm gonna butcher the author's name, but Paulo Coelho, Coelho. So The Alchemist, why'd you pick that book?
Have either you read it?
I have read it, yes.
It's a simple read. Actually, I bought that book before I went to Thailand in 2009. And that was a long flight, long enough that I read that book twice on the way there. But it's about a guy that follows his destiny. He does something, he starts as a sheep herder and ends up following his destiny. But it's all about how if you put things out in the universe will conspire to help you achieve those things. And I'm sure you get a lot of people that have these that say really strong biographies and whatnot, but I'm a fan of fiction and literature and applying that, seeing some of those things that are overblown, the hyperbole, the satire of these that help you guide your path, and seeing how you would do relationships, because you can boil it down to something that really applies to you. I just think it's an amazing story. And it did drive me in life. It's like achieving something and doing something different and going out there and just asking simple questions that can change the whole trajectory of your life. and never turning down an invitation to do something that people offered out of their goodness of their heart. I think
you fully embrace that then.
I try to, yeah.
100%.
You took that one literally.
And I feel like The Alchemist is about realizing what you can do now to change the trajectory moving forward. Like you said, the universe kind of conspiring
Sure.
On your behalf for what you intend to do. And then when you look backwards at that journey, then the butterfly effect comes into play, where you're like, wow, if it wasn't for that conversation, if it wasn't for that person, if it wasn't for this thing, and you're able to look back retroactively to be like, okay, wow, that it did conspire to bring me to where I am right now. So kind of looking forward, looking back for that confirmation. I just think it's pretty cool.
There's so many ways. I mean, just David and I's story on how we reconnect. I mean, you see this shit all the time. I think it's so true, right? I mean, how you came into our lives via Aaron, it's like you just put good people around you, tell people what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve. And the most interesting man in the world shows up on our podcast, like it's just awesome to see how that happens. So couldn't agree more. So I guess when I start 75 hard here, I'm adding that to the list of reading here next week. So appreciate that, Brent.
It's a good one. You'll get through it quickly.
I've heard many people talk about it multiple times. So yeah, it's I know that it's a well-received book for sure.
Well, Brent, we appreciate you joining. And before we wrap up, a thank you, or a couple thank yous, I should say, and then a tip for the listeners, an ask, and then a proper goodbye. So the first thank you, obviously, is to you, Brent, for joining and for driving all the way to the meetup a few days ago. As of this recording, it was great to actually meet in person, and I hope you met some other good guys while you were there. Thank you to Aaron Newell, who brought us together in the first place and introduced us to you. I think your episode is actually releasing before his, so a little hop, skip, and a jump. But for those of you who would be interested in hearing from Aaron, he has a really cool story. So watch out for that one to release. The tip that I'm going to share with everyone is, if you're having issues with audio and video, we were having issues with audio and video before we started this recording, and the old turn it off and turn it back on again trick with the Wi-Fi router actually worked. So if your video is jumpy, if your audio is jumpy, just reset your router and maybe that fixes it. So just a quick little tip for folks. And then for those of you who enjoyed this episode, which if you've hung on this long, I'd imagine that you did, do us a solid, share the episode, and leave us a review if you haven't had an opportunity to do so yet. So we appreciate it. And Brent, again, I think I can speak on behalf of both Landon and myself. We appreciate your time, your story. We'll probably have you back on too.
And I would just say also, Brent, anything from our listeners that they can be doing to kind of help pursue your cause, where should they find you at? I don't imagine you're just out on all the socials. So like you said, you're looking for potential investors and individuals, and that, where should they find you or reach out to you at?
Yeah, probably the best place is LinkedIn. You'll probably have the opportunity to sort of float my LinkedIn link or my
We'd
email.
Be happy to do that.
They can reach out to me directly. But no, I appreciate you asking. I think that's what a lot of the world is, right? It's those connections, just like you guys, Aaron connected me to you. You guys connected me to that group last weekend, and continue to connect to your audience. That's awesome. I love the amplification of what I'm trying to do. I appreciate it. Absolutely.
We appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah. And
awesome story.
Your LinkedIn link will be in the show notes as well. So for those of you who want to connect, shoot them a connection request. But Brent, appreciate it. For everyone listening, appreciate your time and attention as always. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces.